So yesterday we talked about adding, subtracting, and multiplying polynomials. Today we're going to talk about dividing polynomials. So the process of dividing is very different than adding, subtracting, and multiplying. So we're going to work on dividing for the next couple days. So there's two different ways that we can divide polynomials. One of them is long division. So long division of polynomials kind of works the same as long division with numbers. So let's say I had something like 432 divided by 2. Actually, let's divide it by 3. How would I divide this? How many times does 3 go into 4? Once. Then I multiply 1 times 3, which would be 3. And I subtract, so that would give me 1, and I drop down the 3. Then we do the same thing again. How many times does 3 go into 13? 4. Then I multiply 4 times 3, which would be 12. I subtract, and I would get 1. And then I drop down the 2. And I do the same thing again. How many times does 3 go into 12? 4. Then I multiply. I get 12, subtract, and I have no remainder. So that's how we divide using numbers. We're going to do the same thing but using polynomials, but it's the same process. Right, so for example 1, we are dividing. So the smaller one, or the one that comes second, what we're dividing into it, is going to go on the outside. So I have x minus 1. The one that comes first goes inside of our box. That's what we're dividing into. So x cubed minus x squared minus 2x plus 8. Now I need to see how many times does x go into x cubed, so I can think about it like I'm dividing x cubed just by the x, just by the first term. So if I divide x cubed by x, what am I left with? X squared. So I'm going to write that on top of the x squared term. You want to keep your like terms in line. So I write that right on top of my x squared term. Once we write it on top, we multiply it to everything out front. So what's x squared times x? X cubed. And what's x squared times negative 1? Negative x squared. So from here we multiply with what's out front. And you write it below. The next step is we change the signs. So we change the signs of both things we just wrote here. So the minus becomes a plus, and the positive becomes a negative. So the first term will always cancel because it divided in evenly. What is negative x squared negative x squared plus x squared? 0. It just so happens to be 0. Sometimes we'll get a term there. But then we drop down the next term. And we do the same thing. So we repeat the same steps. So our steps are 1, we divide. Once we divide, we write that number up top. Then we multiply. Then we change the sign and combine with the numbers up top. And then you do it all again. So we're going to do it again. So I have negative 2x divided by just the first term there. So divided by x. What's negative 2x divided by x? negative 2. So since it's a constant, I'm going to write it on top of my constant there. After I divide, what's the next step? Multiply. I'm going to multiply that times everything out front. So negative 2 times x is negative 2x. And negative 2 times negative 1, positive 2. What's the next step? Change the sign and combine. So we change the sign, and combine. So negative 2x plus 2x will cancel. Your first terms will always cancel. And I want to drop down this 8 and combine it with the negative 2. So what's 8 minus 2? 6. Now, once we run out of numbers here, ran out, the last thing I have is my remainder. So my remainder is 6. I can't divide 6 by x. Doesn't work. So that's just my remainder. So once you run out of numbers, whatever's left is your remainder. So my answer here is x squared minus 2, remainder 6. Now the answer can also be written a little bit differently. You can write it as remainder 6, like R6, or it could be written as x squared minus 2, and then the remainder can be written as plus 6 over whatever we divided into it. So that would be x minus 1. So these are the same, they're different ways of writing the same remainder. So these are pretty much the same. It's just writing the remainder differently. I think this way is easier, so you can write it this way every time if you want to. But just know that if you were taking a multiple choice test, it could be written like this too, where the remainder is just on top of what you divided into.
I don't get where you got that.
All right, so let's look at number 2. Which term goes outside the box? X minus 2, the smaller one. So the big one goes inside the box. I have x cubed minus 3x squared minus 7x plus 6. I'm going to write the steps again. First step is what? Divide. What's the second step? Multiply. Third step, change the sign and combine. And the fourth step, repeat. All right, so step 1, we divide. We divide the first term by our first term here. So what is x to the third power divided by x? X squared. I'm going to write that on top of my x squared term because we want to keep our like terms in line. After we divide, what's the next step? Multiply. So we multiply that times both things out front. So x squared times x would be x to the third power. It's always going to be the same thing you just got, the same thing from right above. Same thing we just divided. What is x squared times negative 2? Negative 2x squared. What's next? Change the signs and combine. So the x cubes cancel. What's negative 3x squared plus 2x squared? negative 1x squared, or just negative x squared. If you want to put the 1 there, that's fine. So after we combine, then what do? Repeat. So I start with dividing. What's negative 1x squared divided by x? Negative x, perfect. So that negative x goes on top. Whatever you get when you divide, you write it up top. Whatever we write up top, we multiply with everything out front. So what's negative x times x? Negative x squared. What's negative x times negative 2? So positive 2x. What's the next step? Change the sign and combine. So our first terms cancel. I'm going to drop down this negative 7x. So it's negative 7x minus 2x. Negative 9x. Once we combine, what do we do next? Repeat. So then I start back again with dividing. What's negative 9x divided by x? Negative 9. What do we do after we divide? Multiply with everything out front. So negative 9 times x is negative 9x. It'll always be the same thing right above it. And then what's negative 9 times negative 2? Positive 18. What's next? Change the sign, and combine. So negative 9x plus 9x will cancel. And to combine, I got to drop down that 6. What is 6 minus 18? Negative 12. What's next? That's it. That's our remainder. Right. It is super, super, super important that you are organized for these types of questions. It's the same process again and again and again. 3 steps over and over. Notice here how all of our x squareds are in line. All of our x's are in line, and all of our constants are in line. It's super helpful when you are organized. So just keep all of your like terms in line. My final answer is whatever I wrote on the top. So it would be x squared minus x minus 9 with a remainder of negative 12. Yeah, so the other one would be x squared minus x minus 9. Since the remainder is negative, it would be minus 12 over whatever we divided into it. So that would be x minus 2. So these are the same, just different ways of writing the remainder. So either way is fine, but if you had a multiple choice test, you just may see it written like this. So just be aware that you can write your remainder as r and whatever your remainder is, or you can write it as a fraction. Which is going to go on the outside? The x squared minus x plus 1. So the second one gets written on the outside. Now these questions are the same process over and over, but we may be thrown a curveball if what we're dividing into skips a term. So what I mean by that is we start with x to the 4th power. I need every term after that to be represented. Do I have an x to the 3rd power? No. So I have to put in an x to the 3rd power. So I'm going to put in that spot 0 x to the 3rd power because I don't have one. Like if I start with the 4th power, I need everything after that. So I need 4, 3, 2, 1 if I start with 4. So notice how the last one we started with 3. So I had 3, 2, 1, 0. So in that spot, I'm going to put that 0 x to the 3rd power just as a placeholder. So inside the box, I have x to the fourth power plus 0x cubed, almost skipped it, plus 2x squared minus x plus 5. So just make sure you are including that 0x cubed in that spot. We need every term represented. So you cannot skip a term. So step 1 is divide. I'm dividing my first term by the first term here. So what's x to the fourth power divided by x squared? X squared. So I'm going to write that on top of the x squared. What's next? Multiply. So I multiply that times everything out front. So x squared times x squared is what? X to the fourth power. X squared times negative x. Negative x to the third power. And x squared times 1 is just x squared. After I multiply, what's next? Change the sign. So change the sign, change the sign, change the sign, and then we combine. So the first terms will always cancel. What's 0x cubed plus x cubed? Just x cubed. It's just 0 plus 1, which is just 1. What's 2x squared minus x squared? Just x squared. It's like 2 minus 1, so just x squared. After we combine, what's next? Repeat. So we divide. So what is x cubed divided by x? Or x cubed divided by x squared. I'm sorry, we're dividing the first term here. So x cubed divided by x squared. X. So I put plus x on top. After we divide, what do? Multiply. We're multiplying it times everything out front. So x times x squared would be x to the third power. What's x times negative x? Negative x squared. And x times 1? Just x. What's next? Change the sign, change the sign, change the sign, and combine. So make sure you change the sign of everything in that row. The x cubes cancel. What's x squared plus x squared?
Was the x squared not already?
2x squared. Remember, when you're adding, you just add the coefficients. The variable part stays the same. We're dropping down this negative x. So what's negative x minus x? Negative 2x. What's next? Repeat. We divide. What is 2x squared divided by x squared? 2. So plus 2 on top. What's next? We multiply. We multiply times everything out front. So 2 times x squared is 2x squared. 2 times negative x, negative 2x, and 2 times 1 would be 2. What's next? Change the sign, change the sign, change the sign, and combine. So what happens to our 2x squareds? Cancel. What is negative 2x plus 2x? 0. They cancel out too. And then I'm going to drop down that 5. And what's 5 minus 2? 3. What's next? That's it. What's my remainder? The remainder is 3. So my answer is everything I just wrote up top. So it's x squared plus x plus 2, remainder 3. All right, let's look at the next one. What goes on the outside? X squared plus 3x plus 2. So that means the other one's going to go on the inside. Before I write it on the inside, am I missing any terms? The x squared. So in that spot, I have to put a 0x squared. We need every term represented. So if I start with x to the 4th power, I need x to the 3rd power, x to the 2nd, x to the 1st power, and our constant. So inside the box, I have 2x to the 4th power plus 3x cubed plus 0x squared plus 5x minus 1. What's the first step? Divide. So I'm dividing by my first term out front, which is x squared. So what's 2x to the 4th power divided by x squared? 2x to the 2nd power. So I'm going to write that on top of my x squared. Keep your like terms in line. After I divide, what do? Multiply it to everything out front. So what's 2x squared times x squared? 2x to the 4th. What's 2x squared times 3x? 6x to the 3rd power. And 2x squared times 2? 4x squared. What's next? Change the sign, change the sign, change the sign, and combine. So what happens to my 2x to the 4th powers? Cancel. What's 3x cubed minus 6x cubed? Negative 3x cubed. And what's 0x squared minus 4x squared? Negative 4x squared. What's next? Divide. So I'm dividing by my first term out front. So what is negative 3x cubed divided by x squared? Negative 3x, perfect. Once I write it up top, then what do? Multiply it to everything out front. So negative 3x times x squared. Negative 3x cubes. Negative 3x times 3x. Negative 9x squared. And negative 3x times 2. Negative 6x. What's next? Change the sign, change the sign, change the sign, and combine. What happens to my 3x cubes? Cancel. First terms will always cancel. What's negative 4x squared plus 9x squared? 5x squared. And then I'm going to drop down this 5x. So what's 5x plus 6x? 11x. What's next? Divide. So back to the top. What is 5x squared divided by x squared? 5. After we divide, we multiply. So it's 5 times x squared. 5x squared. 5 times 3x. 15x. And 5 times 2. 10. What's next? Change the sign, change the sign, change the sign, and combine. So what happens to the 5x squareds? Cancel. What's 11x minus 15x? Negative 4x. I'm going to drop down that negative 1. So what's negative 1 minus 10? Negative 11. Next, can I divide negative 4x by x squared? No. So what am I left with? That's our remainder. So we can't divide an x by an x squared, so what we have left is our remainder. So our remainder here is negative 4x minus 11. So my final answer is just everything I wrote on top. So that would be 2x squared minus 3x plus 5, remainder negative 4x minus 11. All right, so number 5. So what's going to go outside the box? X squared plus 3, but am I missing any terms there? And in the first one, I'm also missing an x squared. Perfect. So I need to include both of those as my placeholders. So out front, I have an x squared plus 0x plus 3. And inside the box, I have 2x cubed plus 0x squared, because I was missing that x squared term, minus x minus 7. So including those just count as placeholders. It just helps us stay organized. What's the first step? Divide. So what is 2x to the third power divided by x squared? 2x, perfect. So I'm going to write that on top of the x. What's next? Multiply. So once I write it up top, I multiply it times everything out front. So this would be 2x to the third power. What's 2x times 0x? What's 2 times 0? 0. So that would just be 0x squared. So we just put it there as a placeholder just to keep us organized. What's 2x times 3? 6x. What do I do next? Change the sign. So change the sign, change the sign, change the sign, and combine. What happens to my 2x cubes? They cancel. What's 0x squared minus 0x squared? It cancels too. It's still just 0, so we don't need to write it down below. What's negative x minus 6x? Negative 7x. I'll bring down the 7. What do I do next? Divide. What's negative 7x divided by x squared? You can't do it, so what am I left with? The remainder. So when you can't divide anymore, whatever you have left is your remainder. So what would my answer be here? Perfect. 2x, remainder, negative 7x minus 7. So this was our remainder. We only had one term up top, which is fine. That's possible. Everything left was our remainder because we couldn't divide anymore.